In September 1999, an 18-year-old named Jesse Gelsinger traveled from his home in Arizona to a hospital in Philadelphia to take part in a medical experiment. He was, by the accounts of those who knew him, a warm, funny, slightly rebellious teenager who loved motorcycles and professional wrestling. He had a genetic condition, but a manageable one, controlled with a careful diet and a regimen of pills. He was not dying. He had, by every reasonable expectation, a long life ahead of him. He volunteered for the experiment anyway, not to save himself. The trial was never designed to make him better. He did it to help others, to contribute to research that might one day save babies born with the severe, lethal form of the same condition he carried in a milder form. 4 days after he received the experimental treatment, Jesse Gelsinger was dead, and the investigation that followed would reveal that the young man who volunteered to help had never been fully told about the warning signs, the earlier problems, the animal deaths that might have led him to walk away and might have kept him alive. This is Dark Diagnosis Files, and this is the story of Jesse Gelsinger. Everything in this account comes from the documented public record, from official government investigations, from published academic and regulatory reviews, and from extensive reputable reporting. This is a case that changed the rules of medical research, precisely because of what the investigation into it uncovered. To understand what happened, you first have to understand Jesse's condition. He had a rare metabolic disorder called ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency, usually shortened to OTC deficiency. It's a genetic disorder affecting the liver's ability to break down ammonia, a toxic byproduct that builds up as the body processes protein. Normally, the liver clears ammonia efficiently. In someone with OTC deficiency, it can't, and ammonia accumulates in the blood, rising to levels that can cause brain damage, coma, and death. In its most severe form, OTC deficiency is catastrophic. It's an X-linked disorder that most severely affects boys, and babies born with the full severe version often fall into a coma within days of birth. Many die within their first month of life. It is a genuinely devastating diagnosis, but Jesse had a milder, unusual form. Due to a genetic quirk, a condition where the mutation is present in only some of his cells rather than all of them, his body retained partial function. He'd been diagnosed at age 2, and he managed his condition with a strict low-protein diet and a large daily regimen of medications, nearly 50 pills a day at times. It wasn't easy, but it worked. He was living a normal teenage life. Now, the promise that drew Jesse to Philadelphia. In the 1990s, gene therapy was one of the most exciting frontiers in all of medicine. The concept was revolutionary and beautiful in its simplicity. Many diseases are caused by a single faulty gene. What if you could simply deliver a working copy of that gene into a patient's cells, correcting the underlying defect at its root, not treating the symptoms, curing the cause? The challenge was delivery. How do you get a corrective gene into the right cells inside a living human body? The solution researchers pursued was to use a virus. Viruses are, in a sense, natural gene delivery machines. They've evolved to insert their own genetic material into our cells. So scientists took a virus, stripped out the parts that cause disease, and loaded it with the corrective gene, turning a pathogen into a delivery vehicle. This modified virus is called a vector. At the University of Pennsylvania, researchers were running a trial for an experimental gene therapy for OTC deficiency, using a modified common cold virus, an adenovirus, as the vector to carry a corrected gene to the liver. The excitement around this kind of work in the late 1990s is hard to overstate. Gene therapy was spoken of as the future of all medicine, a technology that might one day cure cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, hemophilia, and countless other inherited diseases at their genetic root. Enormous sums of research money poured into the field. Careers and companies and reputations were built on being first. And in that atmosphere of soaring ambition and intense competition, there was immense pressure to move quickly, to show results, to prove that this revolutionary idea could actually work inside a living human being. That pressure is part of the backdrop to everything that followed, the sense that a breakthrough was within reach, if only the trials could keep moving forward. Here is a crucial, and later much debated, detail about the design of this trial. It was a Phase 1 safety trial. Its purpose was not to cure the participants, it was to test whether the treatment was safe and to find the maximum tolerable dose. And critically, the researchers had made an ethical decision about who to enroll. Rather than testing it on desperately ill babies dying of severe OTC deficiency, They enrolled adults and older individuals with the milder, stable form, people like Jesse. The reasoning was that it would be more ethical to test an unproven, risky therapy on stable volunteers who could give their own informed consent, rather than on dying infants who could not. There's a genuine ethical logic to that. But it also produced a profound paradox, one that sits at the dark heart of this story. The trial enrolled people who were not sick enough to benefit from it. Jesse stood to gain nothing medically. He was, in the truest sense, a volunteer for the good of others, accepting risk purely so that future babies might be saved. That makes what he wasn't told all the more devastating. Jesse was enthusiastic about participating. He reportedly told a friend on the way to Philadelphia, "What's the worst that can happen to me? I die, and it's for the babies." He believed he understood the risks. He signed the consent forms. He was categorized in the study group not expected to benefit personally, contributing instead to evaluating the therapy's safety. On September 13, 1999, Jesse received his infusion of the adenoviral vector, carrying the corrected gene, delivered directly toward his liver. Within hours, something went catastrophically wrong. A dim hospital room, the steady beep of a monitor, a chart showing numbers climbing in the wrong direction. Jesse developed a severe, overwhelming immune response to the viral vector. His body, rather than quietly accepting the modified virus, mounted a massive inflammatory reaction against it, a storm of immune activity spreading through his system. His temperature spiked. He became jaundiced as his liver struggled. His blood began to lose its ability to clot properly, and the very thing his condition was defined by, ammonia, began to climb to dangerous levels in his blood as his body's systems faltered under the assault. Over the next 4 days, despite aggressive intensive care measures, Jesse's condition spiraled. He suffered a cascading failure of one organ system after another, a syndrome of multiple organ failure driven by the runaway immune response to the vector. His brain swelled. He was placed on life support. On September 17, 1999, 4 days after the injection meant to advance a cure, Jesse Gelsinger was pronounced dead. He was 18 years old. A young, essentially healthy man had died in a safety trial. That alone demanded investigation, and what that investigation uncovered turned a tragedy into a scandal that would reshape medical research. When the US Food and Drug Administration and other reviewers examined the trial in detail, they found a series of deeply troubling problems, failures that went far beyond the terrible bad luck of an unexpected reaction. First, and most damning, the informed consent process was incomplete. Investigators found that participants, including Jesse, had not been fully told about serious warning signs that had already emerged. Earlier human volunteers in the trial had reportedly experienced significant side effects from the therapy. Even more alarmingly, in prior preclinical studies, monkeys given a similar approach at high doses had died. These were not minor footnotes. They were exactly the kind of red flags a person deserves to know before they let an experimental virus be injected into their body. Had Jesse been fully informed about these earlier problems, the sick volunteers, the dead monkeys, he or his family might have made a different choice. He might have walked away. He might still be alive. Second, there were serious questions about whether Jesse should even have received the treatment at the moment he did. Reviewers found that his ammonia levels were already elevated, high enough that, under the trial's own stated criteria, his participation at that time was arguably improper. There were rules meant to protect participants, and there were questions about whether those rules had been properly followed in his case. And third, the issue that would come to symbolize the entire affair. There was money, financial conflicts of interest. The investigation revealed that the lead researcher and the university itself had financial stakes connected to the technology and to a biotech company positioned to benefit if the gene therapy succeeded. In other words, the people conducting an experiment on human volunteers also stood to gain financially if that experiment produced a marketable success. Now, it's important to be fair and precise here, and to stay strictly with the documented record. The lead researcher denied that financial considerations affected the study and maintained that Jesse's catastrophic reaction was not something that could have been predicted. Those denials are part of the record too, but the mere existence of such significant financial entanglements in a trial where a healthy young volunteer died raised a profound and lasting question that the field could no longer avoid. How can we trust that a researcher's judgment about risk is purely about science? When that same researcher stands to become wealthy if the trial goes well, the appearance of the conflict alone was corrosive. It suggested that the incentives inside human research had drifted dangerously out of alignment with the duty to protect the humans being researched. Internal documents later showed that people inside the university had in fact raised alarms about these financial arrangements beforehand, warnings that tragically did not prevent what happened. Precautions that had been suggested to reduce risks to participants, such as creating a firewall between the conflicted researcher and key decisions in the trial, were not fully implemented in the way they might have been. Jesse's family, led by his father Paul Gelsinger, who had initially been a passionate supporter of the research, became devastated advocates for the truth once they learned what had not been disclosed. The family sued. The university settled the lawsuit relatively quickly for an undisclosed sum, while declining to formally accept responsibility for Jesse's death. The consequences rippled across all of medicine. Gene therapy, which had been one of the most heavily funded and hyped fields in the world, came to a screeching halt. Trials were suspended, funding evaporated. The entire field entered a long winter of stigma and caution, its promise overshadowed by the death of a single idealistic teenager. It would take many years and a great deal of hard-won new safety knowledge before gene therapy slowly, carefully rebuilt itself into the genuinely promising field it is becoming again today. But the deeper legacy was in the rules. Jesse Gelsinger's death forced a fundamental reckoning with how human research is conducted and overseen. It led to strengthened requirements for informed consent, a renewed insistence that participants must be told the full truth, including prior adverse events, so their consent is genuinely informed. It drove far stricter scrutiny of financial conflicts of interest in clinical trials. It enhanced federal monitoring of gene therapy research specifically and human trials generally, and it changed the culture, at least for a time. A hard reminder that behind every clinical trial is a human being who has placed extraordinary trust in the people running it. A Phase 1 volunteer, especially one who cannot personally benefit, is offering something close to a gift, accepting real risk for the good of strangers they will never meet. That gift imposes an absolute obligation on the researchers to be worthy of it, to tell the whole truth, to put safety above ambition, to keep money from clouding judgment about human lives. In Jesse's case, the documented record shows that obligation was not fully met, and an 18-year-old who wanted nothing more than to help save babies paid for that failure with his life. Jesse Gelsinger is remembered now not as a footnote in a scientific setback, but as a person, a specific, generous young man whose death forced medicine to become more honest with the people who volunteer to advance it. His father spent years afterward advocating for research subjects, making sure his son's name stood for something more than a cautionary date in a textbook. Every patient who today reads a genuinely thorough consent form, who is told the real risks, including the frightening ones, who is protected by rules about disclosure and conflicts of interest, is protected in part because of what happened to Jesse Gelsinger in September of 1999. If documented cases like this one matter to you, please take a moment to subscribe to Dark Diagnosis Files. We investigate the real, recorded failures at the edges of medicine, the experiments, the ethics, and the people whose deaths force the system to do better. Your subscription is what keeps this channel digging into them. This is a real case based on documented government investigations, published findings, and the public record. Every detail is sourced from confirmed reports and reputable reporting. Dark Diagnosis Files investigates the horror that happens around hospitals and medicine. New cases every Sunday, Tuesday, and Friday, real, documented, told with the gravity they deserve. He volunteered for nothing more than the chance to help someone he'd never meet. The least he was owed in return was the truth, and that is the one thing he never got.